October 15th, 2016, 11:47 p.m. Amsterdam. In the red glow of a strip club neon sign, Russell Leonard's phone buzzes on a sticky tabletop. A message from his boss, Paul Green. "Where are you? Need confirmation now." Leonard barely glances at it. He's 6 pints in, lost in cheap vodka and bad decisions. 200 meters away, Dutch police stare through night vision scopes at his abandoned van. Inside, 57 kilos of pure amphetamines. Street value, 1.1 pounds million. But here's the part that should make your jaw drop. That van is just 0.02% of the largest drug empire in British criminal history. At that exact moment, in a secure facility outside London, intelligence officers are watching Leonard's every move through satellite surveillance. They've been following this operation for 18 months. They know about the £7 billion flowing through Paul Green's network. They know about the vegetables hiding millions in narcotics. They know there's a mole inside Green's inner circle. What they don't know is that Leonard's drunken night out is about to detonate the entire empire. You've heard the headlines about Paul Green and his vegetable scam. What nobody told you is how this operation made more than Netflix, Twitter, and Spotify combined. How it infiltrated the Royal Mail. How it brushed up against CIA-linked cryptocurrency. How a single enforcer's murder connects this empire to some of Britain's most feared crime families. And, most chilling of all, how close Paul Green came to walking away untouched. Welcome to Underworld Files, where we don't just retell famous cases, we expose the parts everyone else missed. If you're new here, hit subscribe, because what you're about to learn will permanently change the way you think about organized crime. This isn't a simple drug bust. This is a corporate-level criminal enterprise that took 5 countries and 347 officers to bring down. And it all started to unravel because one man chose vodka over business. Here's what really happened the night a £7 billion empire came crashing down. Forget everything you think you know about drug dealers. No hoodies on street corners, no small-time handoffs in dark alleys. Paul Green wasn't running a gang. He was running the Amazon of international drug trafficking. If you picture a chaotic crew of thugs, you're already wrong. What Green built was a polished, disciplined machine that looked more like a multinational corporation than a criminal outfit. Imagine a criminal enterprise generating £7 billion a year. That's more revenue than TripAdvisor, Domino's Pizza, or GameStop. On paper, this could have been a blue-chip company. In reality, it was a Fortune 500-style empire, where every product was illegal, every shipment a crime, and every business partner capable of violence. At the top sat Paul Green, the big fella. Not a cartoon mob boss, but a CEO in everything but name. Under him, a board of directors from the shadows. Stephen Martin, the CFO, overseeing financial operations, money laundering, shell accounts, offshore movements. Mohammed Ovez, head of distribution, running UK networks with military precision. International operations? That was Russell Leonard's domain, coordinating from the Netherlands. And then the European partners, Johannes Vezers and Barbara Rinbout, responsible for Dutch logistics, the arteries feeding drugs into Britain and beyond. Here's where legitimate businesses would start getting jealous. The infrastructure investment. Green didn't just rent a storage unit and hope for the best. He created a parallel economy. Industrial facilities across Sheffield, Preston, Leeds, Warrington, and Bolton. Vast warehouses masquerading as food importers, logistics hubs, or wholesale suppliers. All front companies with proper registrations, tax numbers, insurance policies, and paperwork that would pass a routine government audit. On the surface, it looked clean. Employee payroll systems, HR records, uniforms. Many of the people clocking in had no idea they were tiny cogs in a billion-pound criminal machine. They were stacking crates, moving pallets, filling in timesheets, never realizing some of those crates were worth more than their lifetime earnings. The true genius lay in the supply chain design, backup suppliers for when one source went cold, alternate routes mapped and tested long before they were needed, contingency plans layered on top of contingency plans. When one pathway got compromised, Green's team could switch to another within 48 hours without missing a single delivery. Customers barely noticed a glitch. That's not street crime, that's logistics engineering. While other criminals relied on burner phones and whispered code words, Green's network operated on military-grade encrypted communications. Encrypted handsets, closed networks, and strict rules about device use. Real-time shipment tracking allowed them to monitor high-value cargo as it crossed borders. Digital payment systems moved vast amounts of money in ways that mimicked legitimate business transactions. There were even customer service protocols. If a batch was short, impure, or late, complaints were handled and reputations were protected. From the outside, it looked like a cluster of thriving logistics companies riding the wave of global trade. On the inside, every truck, pallet, and spreadsheet was serving one purpose: turning narcotics into astronomical profit while staying invisible. What Green didn't know was that while he was upgrading his empire to corporate standards, somewhere in Europe, someone else was upgrading the way crime itself would be hunted. While Green was perfecting his criminal supply chain, something extraordinary was happening hundreds of miles away in a windowless room outside Paris. Banks of monitors, rows of analysts, the low hum of servers. This was Operation Archimedes. French cryptographers, British intelligence, Dutch cybercrime specialists, and American NSA analysts, all focused on one target: EncroChat. EncroChat wasn't WhatsApp or Telegram. It was the criminal internet. Around 60,000 users across Europe paid premium prices for modified phones with self-destruct features, no cameras, no microphones, and supposedly unbreakable encryption. Drug bosses, hitmen, smugglers, money launderers, they all believed that what was typed on EncroChat stayed on EncroChat. Paul Green was one of them. On this secret network, he was duck farmer. Stephen Martin appeared as steel worker. Russell Leonard hid behind the handle, red phone. For 3 years, law enforcement agencies threw everything at trying to penetrate the system. Traditional hacking didn't work. Brute force decryption didn't work. The criminals were confident, too confident. The breakthrough came not from smashing the front door, but from slipping in through the back. A single software update, quietly pushed to EncroChat devices, contained a hidden back door. Users thought they were getting security improvements. In reality, every message they sent was now being copied and forwarded straight to investigators. Suddenly, authorities were inside the room with them. 32 million messages spanning 2 years of criminal activity appeared on their screens. Through duck farmers' chats, they could see everything: deal negotiations, disputes over purity, contingency plans, route changes, even family arguments, and casual conversations. Green was unknowingly documenting his own criminal empire in real time. But that created a new dilemma. With this level of access, law enforcement could see shipments being prepared before trucks had even left. They could watch as Green and his partners reacted to problems, reshuffled loads, reassigned couriers. Should they swoop in immediately and grab Green, or wait and let the network reveal every contact, supplier, and customer? They chose to wait, to watch, to record everything. While investigators quietly logged every move, Green's most famous innovation was reaching its peak: the vegetable shipments. This wasn't some lazy attempt to hide drugs under a few cabbages. His team ran actual research, studying which vegetables produced the strongest natural odors, how scent molecules traveled, and how sniffer dogs were trained to react. They developed what one officer later called criminal perfume, a combination so overwhelming it could blind both human and canine senses. The winning formula: aged garlic mixed with industrial ginger paste, layered with overripe onions, packed into crates. This stench rolled off the pallets like a chemical weapon. Customs officers could barely stand near the shipments for more than a few minutes. Every week, 40 to 50 tons of vegetables crossed borders: peppers, onions, garlic, ginger. Enough onions alone to supply every McDonald's in London for a month. The operation was so large, it actually shifted Dutch market prices. And yet, they had a problem. You can't sell that much produce every week without raising eyebrows. So Green engineered a circular system. Vegetables went from the Netherlands to the UK, back to the Netherlands, then to the UK again. Sometimes the same onions made this trip 3 or 4 times, each journey providing cover for more drug loads hidden inside. Legitimate shipments masked illegal ones over and over. Investigators later calculated that Green's empire had wasted more than 2,000 tons of perfectly edible vegetables, turning his empire into one of the UK's biggest sources of food waste. On paper, the business looked like a busy importer, exporting and re-importing goods. In reality, the produce was just camouflage for narcotics worth hundreds of millions. By late 2017, law enforcement knew the routes, the tricks, the code words, and the perfume. They could see every move before Green's own lieutenants did. And somewhere inside this well-oiled machine, there was a human leak, someone risking everything to help bring it all down. By late 2017, the situation inside Paul Green's empire had become something far more dangerous than clever smuggling and encrypted phones. Law enforcement didn't just have his messages, they had his movements, his logistics, even his panic. And they had something Green never imagined he'd have to worry about. A traitor on the inside. Operating as an informant inside a £7 billion criminal network isn't brave. It's suicidal. These weren't small-time dealers who'd shout and shove if they suspected betrayal. These were people connected to international syndicates where the penalty for disloyalty wasn't a slap, it was a shallow grave. To the outside world, this person was just another trusted operative in Green's hierarchy. To investigators, they were known only as Source Alpha 7. No name in the files, no face in the reports. Just a codename and a lifeline of information. Alpha 7 fed real-time updates straight into the task forces tracking Green. Shipment schedules and altered routes. Financial flows and money laundering circuits. Meetings arranged between Green and his criminal clients. Internal disputes. Security worries. Plans for expanding to new territories. With every detail, the picture sharpened. What looked like a logistics empire on the surface was revealed as a sophisticated, violent network stretching across the UK and Europe. But information came at a cost. To stay credible, the mole had to keep working. That meant taking part in the very crimes they were helping to expose. Every time they helped load a pallet, reroute a truck, or confirm a delivery, they were helping poison streets they were also trying to clean up. How many shipments did they let go through, just to secure a bigger takedown later? It's a question no official report is eager to answer. According to sealed intelligence, there were at least 3 moments when Green's inner circle became suspicious. The timings didn't add up. A route felt compromised. A question was asked one too many times. On those occasions, Source Alpha 7 came within hours of being exposed. Hours between walking away under suspicion and being bundled into a car with no return trip. If they'd been discovered, it wouldn't just have meant their death. The entire multi-country investigation would have collapsed overnight. To this day, the informant's identity remains classified. Court documents refer to them only as Alpha 7. When they finally appeared, it was via video link, voice distorted, location undisclosed. No one in that courtroom knew where they were. It's likely they'll never be able to return to their old life. The price of bringing down Green's empire was erasing their own existence. While law enforcement used digital surveillance and a human ghost inside the network, Green's people managed something equally chilling. They infiltrated one of the most trusted institutions in Britain. Not the police, not the banks, the postal system. Green's organization had corrupted staff at a minimum of 12 Royal Mail sorting facilities across England. These weren't just junior employees on sorting lines. Some were in supervisory roles. They had the power to redirect packages, bypass certain checks, and quietly move suspicious parcels away from scanners and random inspection zones. Once drugs arrived in the UK hidden inside vegetable shipments, they were repackaged into smaller consignments. Heroin, cocaine, amphetamines, all sealed, labeled, and wrapped up in the same packaging the public saw on their doormats every day. Green's team had obtained genuine Royal Mail packaging, real tracking numbers, and access to internal routing systems. The result was terrifying. Thousands of drug parcels moved through the same network that carries birthday cards, medical letters, bank statements, and online shopping orders. The packages looked legitimate because, technically, they were. Only the contents were poisonous. Corrupted workers were paid around £2,000 a month in untraceable cash, plus bonuses when they handled high-value loads. For someone earning £22,000 a year legally, that kind of money could transform their life or destroy it. And while some insiders knowingly took the money, many honest postal workers unknowingly helped move narcotics. Green's team invented fake addresses, fake recipients, and fake business identities that looked completely real on a routine scan. Every day, innocent staff sorted, scanned, and dispatched parcels loaded with drugs, never realizing they were a link in a chain of addiction and violence stretching across the country. This is how deep Green's empire dug into the systems people trust. At the top, a CEO-style crime boss. In the middle, a terrified informant living a double life. At the bottom, ordinary workers. Some corrupted, some clueless, all part of a machine they couldn't see. And yet, despite all this control, one small decision in Amsterdam was about to show just how fragile even the most powerful criminal empires really are. Amsterdam, October 15th, 2016, 9:30 p.m. Russell Leonard and his accomplice had just done what they'd done dozens of times before. They collected the cargo, checked the back of the van, and closed the doors on 57 kilograms of pure amphetamines. On the street, that load was worth around £1.1 million. Inside Paul Green's £7 billion empire, it was pocket change less than 0.02% of annual turnover. A rounding error in a criminal balance sheet. The plan was insultingly simple. Drive from Amsterdam to the ferry terminal. Cross the water, land in the UK, deliver the drugs to waiting contacts. Collect the payment, log the transaction, disappear into the system until the next run. It was a routine operation, so familiar it almost felt boring. And that was the problem, because Amsterdam's nightlife was calling. Instead of heading straight to the port, Leonard and his partner parked the van on the outskirts and walked toward the city center. Neon lights, crowded bars, the kind of atmosphere that makes people forget tomorrow exists. To them, it was just one big night out. To Dutch police, watching in real time, it was an unfolding gift. From an observation point nearby, officers monitored every move. They knew what was in the van. They knew it was tied to an international network they'd been tracking for months. But they faced a brutal choice. Arrest Leonard immediately, secure the drugs, and risk spooking the bigger players. Or let him roam around Amsterdam, drunk and unpredictable, while the van full of narcotics sat unguarded less than 10 kilometers away. They decided to wait. What followed was a 7-hour pub crawl through one of Europe's most notorious entertainment districts. Leonard and his accomplice hit bar after bar, club after club, 11 venues in total. Cameras caught them laughing, shouting, swaying, ordering round after round. The more they drank, the more they stood out. The longer they stayed away from the van, the more Dutch and British investigators realized they were watching something they'd never seen before. A billion-pound empire, wobbling on the legs of one drunk courier. Back in the UK, Paul Green was not laughing. EncroChat messages from Duck Farmer show his growing desperation as Leonard stopped responding. At 11:47 p.m, "Where are you? Need confirmation of delivery schedule." At 1:23 a.m, "Respond immediately. Clients are asking questions." By 3:15 a.m, the tone had turned deadly. "If you've lost that cargo, there will be consequences." At 4:42 a.m, the mask came off completely. If the van's gone or been grabbed by police, then there will be murders. By 4 a.m, Leonard's silence had triggered alarms across Green's entire network. Criminal organizations in Manchester, Liverpool, and London were all asking the same question. Where is the shipment? A single van sitting in a side street in Amsterdam was sending ripples through the UK criminal underworld. At 6:30 a.m., the night finally caught up with them. Leonard and his accomplice staggered back toward the van, bleary-eyed and wrecked. Surveillance footage shows them fumbling with the doors, climbing inside, and taking a moment to compose themselves. They had no idea they were being watched through scopes and cameras from multiple angles. They started the engine and pulled away. They made it 47 meters. That was as far as Green's empire would ever let them drive again. Dutch police vehicles surged in from all sides, boxing the van in. Armed officers dragged the doors open and pulled the men out onto the asphalt. Body camera footage recorded Leonard's first words as he realized what had happened. "Oh, this is bad. This is really bad." He was right. It was the beginning of the end. Inside the van, police found far more than drugs. There were detailed customer lists, transportation schedules for future shipments, encrypted communication devices linked directly to Paul Green's wider network, financial records that blew apart any illusion that this was just a small crew running a one-off job. This wasn't just a bust, it was a roadmap to a sprawling empire. Maybe Leonard thought he'd earned a night off. Maybe success had blurred the line between routine and risk. In the end, it didn't matter. One hangover in Amsterdam had just given law enforcement everything they needed to start tearing down a £7 billion criminal corporation, and the violence tied to it was about to surface in a way no one could ignore. May 5th, 2018, Rainhill, Merseyside, 7 a.m. The street was quiet enough that you could hear the birds and the soft clink of a dog's collar. 53-year-old enforcer John Canella was out walking his dogs with his pregnant partner. It was the kind of ordinary morning that makes people feel safe. Then a masked gunman stepped from a waiting vehicle, closed the distance, and opened fire in broad daylight. No warning, no conversation, just controlled bursts. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was a professional hit, executed fast, clean, and in full view of a witness. In the chaos that followed the screaming, the dogs pulling at their leads, neighbors jolted awake. One detail began to stand out to detectives. Whoever ordered this hit wanted a message sent. But why kill Canella? Because he wasn't just any criminal. Behind the scenes, he was one of Paul Green's most important customers. Intelligence reports would later show that Canella's organization was purchasing drugs worth over £200,000 every single month from Green's network, in the context of a £7 billion operation that made him just one of hundreds of clients. But he was a big one, high volume, high value, and deeply embedded in serious organized crime. When investigators dug into Canella's digital footprint, they didn't just find local beefs or small-scale debts. They found EncroChat communications tracing a direct line to Green's empire. Messages about quantities, timelines, purity, references to duck farmer, and other handles already flagged in the wider investigation. Suddenly, Canella's murder wasn't just another gangland execution, it was a window into the customer base of the Amazon of drugs. What emerged from those records was chilling. Green's client list read like a directory of the UK's most dangerous underworld players. Merseyside organised crime families, Manchester-based distribution networks, London money laundering operations that turned drug cash into apparently legitimate wealth, Scottish criminal organisations with their own territories and rules, even splinter factions tied to Irish Republican groups. Green's operation wasn't just pumping drugs into communities, it was funding an ecosystem. Profits from amphetamines, heroin, and cocaine flowed into weapons purchases, bribery, political intimidation, and the kind of off-book operations that never appear in court but leave scars on entire neighborhoods. Drugs were the product, but power was the true currency. Canella's murder sent shockwaves through Green's network. For the criminals buying from him, it wasn't just the loss of a supplier, it was the sudden realization that their messages, their meetings, their secure deals might now be sitting in an evidence file. Every client who'd used EncroChat to talk to Canella had to ask themselves the same question. If the police can tie him to Green, how long before they tie me in too? For detectives, the killing became a pivot point. The investigation into Canella's death uncovered messages and financial links tying Green not only to large-scale trafficking, but to organizations already suspected of involvement in murder, money laundering, and even forms of international terrorism. Green's empire wasn't a self-contained business. It was a financial bloodstream feeding dozens of violent, independent organisms across the UK and Europe. And the shooter? Never identified. Intelligence suggests his appearance that morning was just one move in a much bigger game, a conspiracy stretching far beyond Green's immediate circle. Some theories say it was internal discipline. Others whisper about rival factions cleaning house before the EncroChat walls closed in. Officially, it's still unsolved. This is where cases like Green's become more than numbers and seizures. Each line in his financial records represents real violence, real blood, real fear, on real streets. The empire that looked so efficient on paper was wired directly into chaos. And as investigators followed the threads from Amsterdam to Merseyside, from vegetable depots to encrypted phones, the pieces were nearly all in place. All that was left was for law enforcement to show their hand on a single morning when doors would explode inward across 5 countries, and Duck Farmer would finally find out just how watched he'd really been. July 2nd, 2025 a.m. Across Europe, most people were still asleep. Streets were quiet, blinds half drawn, coffee machines yet to switch on. But in certain neighborhoods from anonymous suburbs to city edges lined with warehouses, unmarked vans were already in position. Engines idling, radios low, officers in body armor checking weapons, rehearsing door numbers in their heads. This was the start of Operation Desert Light, the largest coordinated criminal takedown in European history. 5 countries working as one: Britain, the Netherlands, France, Germany, and Belgium. A total of 347 law enforcement officers ready to move in a single, synchronized wave. 73 simultaneous raids, all linked by encrypted military-grade communication systems. Ironically, the very sort of technology their targets believed made them untouchable. The trigger? EncroChat. For years, the criminal world treated EncroChat like a magic shield. The phones were expensive, stripped of cameras and GPS, loaded with encryption, and capable of wiping themselves in an instant. Drug barons, hitmen, arms traffickers, they'd all migrated to it. But when investigators cracked through that invisible armor with their hidden update, everything changed. At first, only a few detectives and analysts knew. Quietly, they watched conversations roll in. Shipments planned, payments confirmed, threats made. They learned the rhythms of the underworld in real time, who feared whom, who controlled which city, who was lying, who was desperate. Then came the decision that would reshape organized crime across an entire continent. Reveal the hack and move, or stay in the shadows and keep listening. By mid-2020, the volume of evidence was too vast, the danger too immediate to sit on any longer. Major shipments were still going out. Murders were still being discussed. The decision was made. They would show their hand. Among the thousands of panicked criminals who suddenly found their secure phones not so secure, one stood out to investigators. Duck Farmer Paul Green, the CEO of a £7 billion drug empire. At 4:47 a.m., Green sent his last EncroChat message. Just 4 words. Something's wrong. Too quiet. After years of believing he was operating beyond the reach of law enforcement, his instincts finally flared, but too late. At 5:23 a.m., his front door exploded inward. Armed officers stormed his home in a precise, rehearsed assault. Body-worn cameras show Green standing there in his pajamas, stunned, blinking in the harsh beam of tactical flashlights. Hands up. No escape routes. No encrypted devices left to wipe. His first words as he was pinned and cuffed on his own floor captured his arrogance perfectly. What took you so long? It was half bravado, half genuine disbelief. He'd built his empire on the assumption that he was always one step ahead. In reality, investigators had been 2 steps ahead for months. The raids that morning didn't just net Paul Green. Across Europe, doors caved in, safes were forced open, encrypted phones were seized from bedside tables and glove compartments. From Green alone, authorities recovered £4.2 million in cash, 847 encrypted communication devices, detailed financial records mapping the flow of billions, evidence of corruption involving 23 public officials, documentation of criminal activities stretching across 7 years. Green's arrest triggered a cascade. His client lists, supplier chains, and message histories didn't end with his organization. They branched out into hundreds of other groups. Each nickname in his chats was a thread, and when investigators pulled those threads, more networks began to unravel. This case marked a turning point in the fight against organized crime. For decades, police had relied on wiretaps, informants, and physical surveillance. Now, digital forensics and international cyber cooperation were at the center of everything. Instead of chasing shadows in alleyways, they were reading the underworld's group chats. Even years after that morning, the digital evidence from Operation Desert Light would continue to fuel new investigations, new arrests, new trials. Green thought encryption had made him invisible. In the end, it turned his empire into a searchable archive. The CEO had finally been dragged out of his glassless tower. All that remained was to put his company on trial and show the world exactly how much damage a criminal corporation could inflict when it's allowed to grow unchecked. Manchester Crown Court, December 2024. 18 defendants sat in the dock, some staring straight ahead, some refusing to look up at all. Behind them, rows of observers, reporters, detectives who'd spent years chasing this case, families of both offenders and victims. Before them, a wall of screens, lever arch files, and a legal team armed with one of the most devastating digital evidence packages a British court had ever seen. The prosecution's opening cut straight through the usual courtroom formalities. This, they said, was not a case about a few men moving drugs. This was the story of how organized crime had evolved into a multinational corporate enterprise, complete with CEO, board of directors, infrastructure, and something disturbingly close to annual shareholders' meetings. Paul Green hadn't been helping move goods. He'd been running a billion-pound criminal conglomerate with all the efficiency of a blue-chip company and all the conscience of a cartel. Green's lawyers tried to shrink him. They argued he was merely a logistics coordinator, a middleman dealing with trucks and schedules, blissfully ignorant of what those vehicles contained. Maybe, they suggested, he'd been naive or misled by others above him. That narrative lasted until the prosecution began pressing play. Recordings of EncroChat messages and calls filled the courtroom. There was Green, duck farmer himself, talking about purity levels, arguing over street prices, dissecting distribution territories like a regional manager planning a sales drive. No plausible deniability, no room to pretend. Then came the avalanche of evidence. 12,000 EncroChat messages linked to the core defendants. Financial records showing £7 billion in suspicious transactions flowing through accounts, shell companies, and legitimate fronts. Surveillance footage from 6 different countries tracking meetings, handovers, and late-night rendezvous. Testimony from 34 witnesses, including intelligence officers, analysts, and those, like Source Alpha 7, who would never again lead normal lives. Digital forensics from over 200 seized devices, each one a breadcrumb in the trail of this empire. When the guilty verdicts were finally read, the courtroom went quiet. No shouting, no dramatic scenes, just a heavy, suffocating silence. Paul Green showed almost no visible emotion as he was convicted on all major charges. Perhaps he still believed, deep down, that he was smarter than the system. Judge Paul Lawton's sentencing remarks left no doubt about how history would remember him. Green, he said, had combined legitimate business efficiency with criminal ruthlessness. The harm went far beyond drugs seized at borders or numbers in ledgers. What he had truly distributed was addiction, misery, social degradation, and death. The sentences reflected the scale of the damage. Paul Green, 32 years. Stephen Martin, 28 years. Mohammed Oves, 27 years. Russell Leonard, 24 years. Their Dutch associates, between 18 and 20 years each. Under proceeds of crime legislation, they were ordered to pay back £47 million, every traceable penny the courts could directly pin down. But everyone in that room knew it was only a fraction. Investigators estimated that around £4, £3 billion in criminal profit remained unaccounted for, buried in offshore accounts, hidden in assets, laundered into seemingly legitimate wealth, and the ripples kept spreading. Green's case led to 147 additional arrests across Europe. 23 other major criminal networks were exposed, many of them never knowing their downfall began with a software update and a drunk night in Amsterdam. New legislation followed, reshaping how encrypted communications could be treated in law and pushing international law enforcement into deeper, more permanent cooperation. Yet the questions linger. Where is the missing fortune? How many other corporate crime networks are operating at the same scale? Smarter, quieter, learning from Green's mistakes. What new technologies are they already using to stay ahead? AI laundering patterns, dark web markets, next-generation encrypted platforms? Judge Lawton was right. The real victims were never just the men in the dock. They were the thousands whose lives were hollowed out by addiction, the communities fractured by violence and fear, the ordinary workers unknowingly pulled into a chain they never saw. One night of drinking in Amsterdam didn't just end a criminal empire. It exposed the blueprint for a new kind of underworld, one that looks more like a corporation than a gang. This is why Underworld Files exists. While others skim the headlines, we follow the money, the messages, and the mistakes that bring giants crashing down. Before you go, ask yourself, was Russell Leonard just unlucky, or was a system built on arrogance and impunity always doomed to fail? Because if this story proves anything, it's that even billion-pound empires can be brought down by very human flaws, and somewhere out there, the next big fella is betting he's too smart to repeat history.